Moving on. Deuteronomy 22, we have verses 23 through 29, which give a few different laws related to sexual assault. And the first couple ones talk about sexual assault of a woman who is married, and then sexual assault of a woman who is only betrothed or engaged to be married. In all of those instances of sexual assault, the penalty for the perpetrator is capital punishment, is the death penalty. But down at the bottom we see if a man meets a virgin who is not engaged and seizes her and lies with her, this is indisputably sexual assault, and they are discovered, the man who lay with her shall give 50 shekels of silver to the young woman's father, and she shall become his wife. Because he violated her, he shall not be permitted to divorce her as long as he lives. So what's going on here?
That is a great question. Fingers crossed that you can tell us.
Here, why is the punishment not death? Well, it's because she's not betrothed to someone else. What this reveals is that marriage was primarily a question of property rights. To violate that contract by violating the sexual availability and the procreative capacities of that woman, the property rights of the man have been violated, and so the penalty is death. When the woman is a virgin, the only property rights that have been violated are the property rights of the father, who stands to profit from selling his daughter into marriage. And that's not considered quite as serious. And so the penalty is that the perpetrator must pay the father an elevated bride price and then must take the daughter as his wife and is not allowed to divorce her. It's not the death penalty because the violation was not as severe, which makes clear that the primary concern of these laws is not protecting the victim.
So close, but yet so far. Dan did get some parts of this right, but overwhelmingly he got it wrong. So again, I'm not going to ask you to accept my dogma as fact. We're going to go back to the consensus scholarship when it comes to this particular reference and claim by going to Halot and looking at that once more. So Dan did get some parts of it right in that the word actually does mean seize. However, what he doesn't want the audience to know is that it's the same grammatical stem that we find in Genesis 39:12. What does Genesis 39:12 say? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is the story of Joseph when he was in Egypt and Potiphar's wife had a sexual attraction towards him and wanted to bring him to bed. So if we back up to verse 10, we read, "And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day, when he went into the house to attend to his duties and none of the household servants was inside, she caught him by his cloak and said, 'Come to bed with me.' But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house." The word that I want to bring your attention to is caught in verse 12. It's the same word we find as seized in Deuteronomy 22:28. So my question to anyone watching this video would be, does the sentence, "she caught him by his cloak and said, 'Come to bed with me,' conjure up in your mind images of sexual force? Absolutely not. Even though the word does mean seized, in this particular grammatical stem, it better correlates to a passionate grasp, or grasping something in passion and desire, not a forced sexual experience. Now, the second thing we need to look at is the verse that Dan is actually quoting in Deuteronomy 22:28. And what we want to focus on is the end of verse 28. Do you see that very last word, discovered? It's the same word we find in verse 22 when it specifically talks about a man sleeping with a married woman. They are discovered, meaning that their sexual relationship is discovered by another person or by other individuals and doesn't have any designation to a forced sexual experience. So what Deuteronomy 22:28 is literally trying to say is that if a man finds a virgin woman who is not betrothed and grasps her in passion and says, "Come to bed with me," and she agrees, and it's a consensual experience, however, if they are found out by another individual or another person, then the man has to pay her father an elevated bride price because he has taken away her dignity, her respect, and her honor within the culture. She may never be able to marry again because now she's seen by the community as damaged goods. This is why the man is responsible to marry her and why he can never divorce her as long as he lives, because he has defiled her And now, in order to protect her and in order to make sure that she is cared for and is able to have a life and assimilate into the community, she has to be married, and he is not allowed to divorce her for the rest of his life. This is putting all the onus and all the penalty on the man. And unlike what Dan is suggesting, the entire reason this law exists is to protect the dignity and value of the woman who is the victim in this situation. So I'm not going to lie, I was hoping for a little bit more of a challenge, but the final score that we're going to have tonight is Data 6, Dogma 0.